Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. In this incredibly moving finale to this series, Wendy untangles her journey to find the deep insights and wisdom and the universal truths that have emerged from her quest. This is the essence of her adventure and a must listen.
All right, so here we go with the final chapter of this wild and crazy journey. I think you will remember that, with great trepidation, Gary and I finally turned around at the end of the last episode, and I inched my way down the mountain with this old lady chattering the whole time. And that is when I sort of set my mind to, okay, well, this didn't work, so what's going to work? So clearly, I need to go back and be with my family. Family must be the way to God. And because if you'll recall, the whole journey has been about guidance, testing the Course in Miracles and trying, learning, hoping I can hear guidance, and phenomenal confusion because there had been many, many miracles along the way that showed me undeniably that something was going on, something was watching me, something was caring for me. Yet it had been such a terribly difficult journey. So I came down that hill, huge mountain, feeling like a phenomenal failure. Like I had done everything wrong. And this was my attempt to find this other world that the Course in Miracles talks about, the real world that, Neverland, Shangri-La, Nirvana, Oz. Why was there so much literature, for heaven, needless to say, referring to this other world? And I had failed to find it. And I had no plan B. I thought making a plan B was like a faithless thing to do. And so I was really, and I'd almost tripped over that dead body on my way down. And, it was like, I'm dead. It's clear. I'm completely, something in me had died. I didn't know what at that point. But so we take a long, long journey back to La Paz. And I am a ghost wandering around La Paz with phenomenal amounts of confusion. Imagine, okay, so there's two paradigms that are absolutely clashing in my mind. And really, this is the essence, the definition of the borderlands, which, as I said earlier, Don Juan in the Castaneda series defined as that space between the parallel lines of the world and the real world, using Course in Miracles terms. There is a space that is bleak beyond all imagining. And the only good point about it is what it leads to. In other words, the real world, Shangri-La. And I knew, both from the visuals of everything I had been through and how hard everything was, and the monumental confusion in my mind. So the two paradigms kind of defined very briefly were one was kind of Sleeping Beauty paradigm of the hero manages to find and wake Sleeping Beauty by not giving up. And that was his major thing, is that he slashed through all the thorns and was the winner of the prize because he did not give up. And I really felt like I had given up. I wasn't strong enough. I didn't believe enough, blah, blah, blah. The other paradigm was the words that I had received, which really felt like the very first piece of really clear guidance I had ever received after I had gotten very lost in the Hawaiian jungle. And via guidance, turn left here, go down, da, da, da. I had found my way out. And at the end, I heard really clearly, if the way is hard, it's not the way. And those two paradigms were completely crashing inside of me and creating complete havoc, to say the very least. So we met with Juan after, forever, just wandering through La Paz like a dead person. And Juan, I thought at least I would get some explanation from Juan. And Juan basically said, you should try again. And he said, okay. And the other thing I remember him saying is, beware of the vulture of materialism. And really, neither of those things helped me very much. In fact, the try again thing taunted me for months afterwards. It's like, yeah, I should. A real warrior would keep on trying. But then I think it was after meeting Juan or before, still in La Paz, I had this dream, which is hard to explain. So I'm just going to tell you the essence of it, which was basically that in looking for the monastery, I had gained a perspective of where the true monastery lay. And I could never have found that perspective had I not gone to the wrong, quote, monastery, right? So we keep going, and we go to Miami because I want to see my grandmother. I want to sit on her beautiful veranda outside of Palm Beach and, soak in the lushness of Florida and my grandmother. And I loved her so much. So I called her and said I was home and I'd love to see her. Oh, dear God. And then she was just like, I'm sorry, Wendy, I don't talk to people like you. Boom. End of conversation. My beloved grandmother. And that was the whole note as I went to New York and then Maryland to visit family. It was, the cold shoulder is an understatement of the century. It was unbelievable. Not one person asked me about the journey. Not one person asked me what had happened. In the 2 years I had been gone, and I hadn't seen any of my family in more years than that. My father, when I called to say Gary and I were going to come visit, he said, hey, this is not a hippie crash pad. You can stay for 3 days. It's an unbelievable, shocking response. Unbelievable. So once again, a dream, an idea of how God was found completely crashed at my feet. Yet another. It's like, well, family? Okay, that was my family, and they are cruel, heartless, cold, cold, cold people who were totally uninterested in me and what I was doing and what had just happened to me. So I go on to New Mexico. Gary goes back home for a while and we separate. And then I have this phenomenal reunion with Bess, this longed for reunion. And I can't really talk about it. It was so beautiful to finally hold my little girl in my arms. I had missed her so desperately. But that too came with phenomenal confusion and guilt. My guilt was so huge at that time because that night she couldn't eat. She obviously had a fever, the beginnings of a fever. And her stepmother was like screaming at her to eat her food. And the house was a huge mess. And I'd realized fully, came face to face with the fact that I left Bess in a situation that was way less than optimal. Her dad had written and said he'd really gotten his self together and everything was beautiful. They were growing a garden. Well, absolutely. The place was a complete wreck. My gorgeous home that I built with my own hands. And my daughter was coming down with some sort of illness. Obviously, we were staying in a cabin close by my home, my old house that I had built. And the next day, I think she slept the whole next day. And then I took her to the doctor, and lo and behold, she had hepatitis. My guilt then was so unbelievable. It turns out she had caught it from a kid who had just come back from Mexico, but I just felt like. But the interesting fact is there's a 2-week delay between when one is exposed and one gets the virus, actually gets sick. And that had been exactly 2 weeks since I had been on that pinnacle, just before turning around. And Bess had called to me in the night, woken me up in a voice of terrible distress, "Mom!" And I knew this had happened before between me and Bess. I knew that was her call to me, that she couldn't handle anymore. She was at the end of her rope, and it was absolutely true. And in many ways, I can say that Bess saved my life with that call. Another thing that happened during that time is that she said she had a recurring dream while I was gone. And in the dream, I was searching for the monastery. And she said, "Mom, you found a corner of the monastery. You found a piece of it. It was like a big quilt. And you found a piece of it." And I thought, what a fascinating thing. What a beautiful, anyway, it impacted me enormously. And I really kept it in the back of my mind of what on earth that meant. So at this point, it's very clear to me, or it's beginning to be clear to me, that the universe is really, really trying to help me a lot, because I was in very bad mental health shape. And one of the most helpful things that came along, this is a true story. I was in this funky little health food store in Taos, New Mexico, and I'm walking along, and this book falls off the shelf, and I catch it. And it's called Right Use of Will by Cian de Rohan. It was a major turning point for me. She talks about the fact that we are emotionally phenomenally repressed, and that we have repressed our really strong emotions to such a huge degree that when finally we get triggered and we're really, really angry or really sad about something, it comes out looking very crazy, and people reject us and judge us and put us down, give us drugs. And then once again, the whole emotional, backlog that's literally thousands of years old gets smothered one more time. And she claimed that the bottom line fury is really fury at God, because we don't know how to get out of this mess. And we're furious about it. And we can't figure it out. And boy, did that just rung such a huge bell for me, because I tried so hard to get out. And I was very, very numb. I went to a funeral of a very good friend who had shot herself and left herself for her 14-year-old daughter to find her. And even that didn't, my emotions didn't even come with that. I was absolutely stone cold. And Cian de Rohan said that one must clear the emotional channel in the body and let this rage out in a very physical way in order to hear guidance. She said it's kind of the same channel. I don't really understand that exactly, but this all was making a lot of sense to me. And so she says, wait for a trigger, and then go someplace you feel safe and really start expressing it. Well, finally, I did have a trigger. It was late one afternoon. It was seeing a movie, oddly, and I couldn't stop crying in the movie. And so I left, and I parked someplace and walked deep into the pinon forest and saw how ashamed I was of my emotions by how far I walked into the wilderness, so that I could make sure that absolutely no one heard me. And then I began my fury with God. And, plug your ears, because I'm going to really say the kinds of things I said to God, because I was so mad. I'm like, what kind of fucking God are you? I am so sick of this cat and mouse game that you're playing. This, it's like this guessing game of can you catch me if you can, and all the confusion, and why the fuck don't you make it clearer? What is wrong with this situation? I was drooling. I was foaming at the mouth. I was screaming at the clouds. I mean, screaming. And I took sticks and hit trees and laid on the ground and kicked my feet. And this lasted, there was so much more I said to God. You can imagine. You can just imagine. I tried so hard. I've been lying on a bed of nails for 2 years. What do you want? What does it take? A light rain began after about an hour, hour and a half of me raging. And I laid on the ground, and I felt this enormous weight lift off of me as the light trickle of rain began to touch me. And exhausted, I walked home. And it really was a major turning point for me. Sianda Rohan is absolutely correct, because the guidance started to be much clearer from then on. And basically, I didn't have a lot of time to be putting into really doing a lot of meditation and listening and all of that. But listening to guidance was the only thing I had left. It really was. And so I clung to it. It was like I was still trying. I had had so many miracles along the way of this journey, and enough signs to make me think that, well, sometimes you're hearing correctly. Sometimes, obviously, you're not, but let us continue. So when the guidance began to say, what you need to do now, because I had no idea what I was going to do next, go to Hawaii. Go to Hawaii and then begin to write. And I want you to write the journey, write the whole story of the journey, and I'm going to interpret it for you. Someplace in the Course in Miracles, the Course talks about the great interpreter of perception. Capital TGP, the great interpreter of perception. And I needed that interpretation really badly. I knew enough at that point that my guilt and my shame and all of that was not the correct perspective. In fact, in the Course, it says pain is proof of a wrong perspective, because pain proclaims God cruel. Interesting. So I still really holding on as best I could. So we go on, we go to Hawaii, and immediately, of course, it is a giant balm to my whole system, which was, my bones were still cold from the altiplano. I'd lost about 15 pounds. I was still a wandering ghost. The worst part of it, though, really, was I was being tortured by visions of the monastery. I think I had mentioned in all that enormous amount of walking we did, what I did with my mind was I constructed the monastery. It literally, I started from the beginning. I walked down this path and I began to see more and more and more of it. More details came in. And I was certain that this was the way I was going to manifest the monastery, with detailed intention and visualization and all of that. Well, clearly that didn't work, but the dream, the vision of it was torturing me. It would not let me go. Many things would not let me go. I wanted to forget that journey so badly and get on with my life. But this vision kept happening, and more things kept happening, which I'll talk about. But Hawaii was a start of what guidance had said soon after the episode in the forest was that, well, I'll go on with the story. I won't talk about that later. I'll talk about that later. But basically, I saw myself as I got to Hawaii that I was unpacking lightly. There was a part of me that was like, maybe I'll try again. Maybe the Crystal Monastery in India, something. Go find a teacher who can tell me what to do. All of these things were still very much in my mind. We had 1 million visitors right away, and after the incident with my family, I then went, okay, service is the answer. I'm going to serve. There's nothing left. I've tried everything else. Service must be the answer. So when we had 1,000 visitors, I was the queen of hospitality. So there's really two personalities going on here. One, the one that was gracious and, feeding everybody and washing sheets and stuff like that. And then there was the crazy lady who was totally crazy. Gary and I were we weren't getting along at all. We were both pretty crazy at that point. But what I did, despite Juan's advice of beware of the vulture of materialism, I bought a Macintosh. It was the first one that they ever made. I had such a craving for this little machine. I couldn't deny it, despite the fact it was my first real foray into materialism again. But I overcame, got the Macintosh, and it really was. It was like a god to me because it sucked me in to writing in a very big way. So I began to do longer stints at the computer listening, just beginning because I had way too many visitors to really go deep with it. So then comes Christmas time. And boy, I was going to serve everybody. And I just, wrapping presents, making cooked food, everything, just like tons. And in the very middle of all of that, I discover a book. What was the name of that book? I'm forgetting. Oh, it was Michael Brown's the Weaver and the Abbey. And in this book, and I'm reading it right around Christmas, I'm like devouring it. And he's in the cold Altiplano. I'm re-experiencing the Altiplano, and then he finds the monastery. And I am just completely destroyed by that idea. I certainly held it apart from me and sort of thought, well, he's just saying that. Did he really find it? And I began to realize that there was a total conspiracy afoot to keep me from forgetting and putting it aside and saying, well, that was a bust. I'm just going to forget about it. Because my guidance was constantly telling me, no, write about it. Do not forget about it. Keep going, keep going. And my guidance was getting clearer and clearer with more and more writing. Because what I would do is I'd sit down and I'd say, blah, 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 this just happened. I just got angry at Bess. And why did I do that? And what's wrong with me? Blah, blah. And then I'd hear a very gentle voice explaining things to me and why I was feeling so crazy, at least the very beginnings of an explanation. And the Course says God's answer is always some form of peace. And lo and behold, my body would just go, after one of these sessions of listening. And so something was going on. I was definitely finding peace. I think I also read at that time The Hero's Journey, which really started to give me a new perspective. Here I was feeling like this monumental failure. And in The Hero's Journey, which Joseph Campbell, which I had not read before, my journey was perfectly delineated as far as the stages of what the hero's journey is about. And that kind of blew me away in a big way. And so this tiny sort of sliver of light was starting to come in to my consciousness. And then, so it's Christmas, and I bought Bess a lovebird for Christmas. And this was another big turning point. And a few days later, a week later, something like that, I was cleaning the house, and suddenly I couldn't find the lovebird. And I looked high and low and everything. No, the lovebird I had left a door open or a window open or something and had escaped. And it just devastated me. Totally, like what I'd done to my daughter. Oh my God, here I'd messed up yet again. And then I sat down to listen to guidance. And it basically said, this is a perfect reflection for you, Wendy. This is a reflection and a message. This is not another guilt trip. The message was, this is a reflection of how badly you want to be free. You want to be free of your cage and how much you feel like you're a caged creature. And And it ended with, what if you began to look at this experience on earth as not something to be escaped from, but an opportunity to be enhanced? And so I just sort of held that with all the other conflicts. And Gary and I split up soon after Christmas. And finally, then I had the time to really go deep. I was very much avoiding writing the story of the journey. But in my journals, basically what the guidance was saying was, it's time, you really need to go back because you left an enormous amount up on those mountains. There's a huge amount of disowned pain inside of you. You need to grieve the fact you didn't find the monastery. Your body is in terrible pain and you need to start paying attention to it, not running away from it. You need to go into your pain, not run from it, which I started to do. Nonetheless, my mental health was a total disaster because I couldn't find any meaning. How I wanted to put this whole journey into some sort of slot where I could say that was a success or that was a failure, right? It was a success if Juan had been part of the dark force and was luring us to our deaths, which was totally possible. We were in the land of sorcery in the southern hemisphere. You know, the journey was extremely dark, and I escaped. I escaped the pull of the darkness. So I was a success. Or I had totally failed. I was a failed aspirant, you know, and it was like bouncing back and forth between these perspectives. All structure of meaning had died within me. I couldn't put anything into categories or find peace in meaning. What was the meaning of that journey? That crazy, crazy journey. But my guidance continually urged me to keep writing and to write the story. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to go up there again, because I went up there as a very hopeful person. As difficult as everything was, there was always this enormous amount of hope that I was going to find it, and that, you know, I then would live a life of peace in a peaceful place around very, very high beings who could answer all my questions. And I didn't want to go watch myself be cold and wandering. And I was thinking, this is going to be yet another self-indulgent waste of time. Haven't I wasted enough time on my own, you know, little self-indulgent things? It was literally, but still, it was amazing how demanding, in a way, my journals became at that time, my guidance, really urging me to start writing it. So I did. And the first part of it was really pretty easy. So I'm just writing the story at my computer. And gradually, you know, the guidance comes in little by little in the story, showing me where I had left myself behind, my feelings, my body. I completely had to deny all the fear, which was a huge amount, and all the confusion and everything. I was just single-minded, gonna find the monastery. And I did not want to review that poor woman doing that. Seeing myself as a total failure. So we finally come to the place where, I say we, because it's like I'm riding with this guidance. It's really, really like it's on my shoulder, whispering in my ear with the whole journey at this point. And so we come to the place where Gary and I, high on that pinnacle, Gary and I decided to turn around after I'd heard Vess's wail of distress in the middle of the night, and we had received no information from the townspeople about where the monastery might be. And I am, in my mind, as I write that scene, screaming at myself, why did you turn around? Why didn't you keep going? I'm really, really crying and screaming at myself. And the voice comes in, guidance comes in and says, basically, you know where the monastery is. Why do you keep refusing to go there? Go there. And what it was referring to was that vision I had of the monastery, and basically saying, in your imagination, go into the monastery. And so in writing, I wrote exactly what I'd been seeing over the last year, 2 years almost. And I won't go into the details of the beauty of it and the harmony and the love and this perfect community. And finally, I come to what I see as like a crystal dome. Imagine like a faceted crystal roof, rounded faceted crystal roof with these crystal pillars and like a crystal floor. And the sun coming through created millions of rainbows, and just the light was so beautiful, and it was arched. So each arch showed, once I was inside this beautiful dome sitting in the center of it, each arch had a gorgeous floral scene within the vision of the whole thing. And I sit down and I start to meditate. In my imagination, I'm in the monastery and I'm meditating. And this is on May 28th, 1985, the biggest turning point of my life. Because the voice began to speak extremely clearly at this moment. And it began to show me what on earth the whole journey had been about.
Want to hear more of the conversation? Sign up at bumpintheroad.us as a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. You can give it a go for free. Just use the code FREEMONTH. And thank you for listening today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.